We are live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session, another Q&A session for the Isaac Radanski's Digital Advertising Superstars Facebook group. I'm Patrick Gilbert, joined as always by Danielle Immerman, and this week we brought on SD Nadoff, one of our senior account managers here at Adventure. Isaac is also out of the office today, but we wanted to bring in SD to get some of her perspective on some of the topics that we talk about. SD is an excellent resource for a lot of the things that we talk about. She's one of the people that I go to very often to flesh out ideas and work through concepts. She's a huge help for a lot of the content that we've put out over the years at Adventure Media. Need to plug the book, Join or Die, Digital Advertising in the Age of Automation, now available on Amazon. Hardcover, which is what this is, paperback, Kindle. It's on sale right now on Amazon. Check it out. The reviews have been excellent. The feedback has been excellent. And I really appreciate all the kind words that everyone has reached out to, whether it's specifically on Amazon or on Twitter, LinkedIn. It really does mean a lot. And as part of it, actually, some people have been asking questions that we're going to be answering on this session today. So again, thank you for that. But just to kick things off, SD, how are you? How are things going today?
Good. I'm really excited to be here and join this group. So thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I wanted to kick things off before we dive into any of the specific questions that we've gathered from the group. SD, I want to ask you about a topic that we've sort of been discussing a lot internally about Facebook account structure. This is a big topic that I think a lot of people have questions about. And there's a lot of changes that are taking place with Facebook, both in strategy and on the back end. But I'm curious as far as, how this changes anything that you're looking at. What is your best practice mentality? How do you approach Facebook account structure and setting it up for not just profitability, but how to scale accounts when we bring them on board?
That's a really great question. Yeah, we've been talking a lot internally, our teams, about different structures within Facebook and what we've seen with best practices. And really, it's a game of trying to set it up for scalability. So what does that take? It's really looking at the short-term goals and long-term goals and trying to create that playbook for your strategy to set yourself up for success. What we really like to do, and what I really like to do specifically, is taking a deep dive into the highest quality audience and really starting from there and building the strategy out from there. Once we kind of max out that audience, that really high quality audience, then it's about expansion and different opportunities, but really trying to hone in based on what you know about the specific customer, what you know about the highest quality customer, and really trying to hone in from there and then expanding.
How do you determine what is the best quality audience?
So I think it's definitely unique for every company, every industry. So let's say, for example, it's e-commerce. We can talk about the highest quality audience. You can take your highest value purchasers, people that have purchased the top 25% of purchase value. That may be the highest quality audience for you if you're trying to really scale up bigger value purchases. That would be a high quality audience. Another high quality audience would be, we have a client that they have entrants from multiple different areas, and we really know that we're trying to get people to enter for a specific award for one of these advertising awards. Now, what we did, they have huge customer lists from years and years of going on. We took the last couple years because we feel like that is the highest quality, are trying to create those lookalike audiences based off the highest quality audience, but really trying to hone in on what recent trends for audiences, as well as taking, not just thousands of customers and trying to expand from there, but taking that highest quality. So again, like that, advertising awards, people that are specifically entered for there, and then expanding.
I think that's a great point. And I think I don't know if you specifically mentioned this, but you're referring to creating lookalike audiences based on that, right?
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting. It's something we talk a lot about with clients is how can we take this audience data and really trim the fat? Because that's the idea of you're training an algorithm to go and figure out who another similar audience is. Well, let's take a second to think about the data that we're feeding into the algorithm first. And I think what you're describing is extremely helpful and just not thought about often enough. The advertising awards client that's a great example. They've been around for a long time. They have years and years and years of data, but like maybe data from 8 years ago isn't as relevant. There's a similar idea with some e-commerce clients is if you see a change in your customer based on seasonality. So let's say, for example, that you get a different type of customer during the holiday season than you generally see throughout the rest of the year. I like to kind of step back and say, maybe we should pull a list of customers that bought between, let's say November 1st and December 15th of last year and use that audience to create a lookalike audience. And that's how we fuel our Black Friday, Cyber Monday type initiatives, as opposed to, hey, here's all our customers. That's one thing I'll do. And the same for like let's say you were a flower delivery business or anything in the gift space. Instead of just like all customers, if you have the data, of course, if you can pull out specifically your Valentine's Day customers from last year, they're probably different than your Mother's Day customers. And I think being able to understand that nuance is extremely important. That's a great point. Are there any other like kind of things that you look at or tips that you have for just like organizing? And I like this idea, right? So start with what you know is quality. But this is all assuming that you have historic data. If you have a brand new, let's say it's a startup with no previous customer history, is there like something that you would look at first as far as, okay, this idea that we know that works is best quality audience. So what's the first thing that you would then do? Like, let's assume that there's no remarketing list, customer list that we can operate on. Where are you going to start?
I'm going to start with, as much research as possible on the client and the customer base to then determine those correlating points of a customer that you can try to create those interest-based audiences and really trying to qualify it that way.
Totally agree. Excellent. Any other thoughts on Facebook account structure? Any sort of like tips, best practices that you find helpful?
Good question. There's a lot. So one thing that I do find is when I inherit an account that's super complex, there's a lot going on, and it's just like I need to kind of tackle and get down to like what was working, what wasn't. I find that I have so many Excel spreadsheets of like previous clients' accounts and campaigns and trying to really understand what the goal was. I write down what their goal was for that account, for that campaign, what they were running, how long it was running for, what type of creatives. I think that's really helpful in understanding and getting a better idea of, marketing initiatives in the past.
So you're actually trying to learn from your past experience. That's a pretty crazy concept.
Exactly. That's why I think it's a tip and advice, because not people do it as much as you think they would.
You're totally right. So we were having, I don't know if you had a chance to read this message yet that I sent in Slack a little bit earlier, but we were discussing the idea of like when you have a contrarian thought, an aspect of your strategy that goes against what you would feel to be a best practice, and how do you really handle that? And I think the first thing is to really acknowledge when that happens, and then err on the side of being willing to test whatever it might be, and then really building in that feedback mechanism to be able to go back and say, okay, well, this worked or it didn't work, and here's how I think, like why it played out this way. And we'll create a log of those things so that maybe 6 months from now, we'll have a similar situation and we'll be able to go about it in a more intelligent way. And this example that you're providing certainly hits that on the head.
Yeah, I did get a chance to read your Slack message, and yeah, I was reading through some of the thoughts on Facebook, and I did have that initial thought, like, no, this is contrary to what we typically believe is a best practice. But it's true. It's like, no, you should be testing these things and really understanding if it works well for different accounts.
Definitely. Awesome. Okay, so the first question that we need to get to came from a reader of Join or Die who reached out to me on LinkedIn. I'm probably going to butcher his name, and I really apologize. But Ivan Tadiq, I believe is how you pronounce. I'm so sorry, Ivan, if I screwed that up. I'm terrible with this stuff. But he had a really, really good question, or two questions that he reached out to about, both on the topic of how to train an algorithm. Now, there's a full chapter dedicated to the concept of training an algorithm in the book, but it's more kind of conceptual. And his questions were very specific. And I really like this because what I tried to do with the book was to create like a framework of topics and questions and ways that we should be thinking about things that could then lead us to exactly these types of questions. So when you sent this message over, it really, I was thrilled because this is exactly how we wanted this to go. I probably should have sent this. I think I did send it to Danielle, if you want to put this up on the screen. So let's say we have two different Google Ads accounts. And again, the question is how to train an algorithm. Example one is for an e-commerce store. So if you have dozens, if not hundreds of conversions a week, big search volume, lots of opportunities, it seems to be a no-brainer for target CPA or target ROAS. CPAs are mostly on the cheap side. How do you train the algorithm to work better and get better over time? Let's say the goal is to reduce CPA as time goes by. So basically what he's saying is, like, let's say that we have an e-commerce store that has a lot of volume and a lot of conversion data. What is the best way to teach the system how to replicate those results and get better at replicating those results at scale? SD, do you have any first thoughts on that?
Yeah, my initial first thoughts are that I think it's really a matter of making efficient changes over time, not too much at once, but for, let's say it's the CPA goal, it would be decreasing it, or if it's the return on ad spend goal, it would be increasing it slightly while adjusting budgets to match your goals. I think these, like, both concepts in tandem, really, adjusting budgets, adjusting goals to increase performance over time would really help.
I agree. I think with that though, you need to be willing to take risks. So I think there's a balance that we often don't vocalize about. Hey, listen, like we're trying to make incremental changes to this campaign because it's profitable, and Ivan, based on the way that you've outlined this, it seems like this campaign is probably chugging along. It's profitable. You'd like to get incremental improvement. Generally, like, our take there is like, don't like turn everything on its head. Try and make some subtle improvements. But that doesn't mean that you really can't take 15% of your budget or 20% of your budget and do something completely crazy with it. And I would definitely encourage that. Now, if you're an agency and you're managing this on behalf of your client, I would definitely be clear about your expectations and the fact that this is a test. And based on what we had just spoken about, you really want to make sure that you have the proper feedback mechanism in place to circle back and see, okay, did this work, did it not work, and why? One thing I would recommend is doing some sort of like crazy experiment, very high risk, very, we're gonna take a couple of our products and we're gonna put them in a campaign and we're gonna put on maximize conversion value. And we're just gonna blow the doors off this thing. We're gonna see what happens. What's good about that is you're essentially forcing the system back into the learning phase. And I think that's really where the major changes are unlocked. And to really simplify this, like this is like the dumbest, dumbed down version of this. Not like, mostly because this is how I understand it, is so there's all these signals that, let's say, Google uses in the auction to predict conversion rate for a given auction. And after that initial test, let's say that they find that, I don't know, there's like 15 different signals that when all the dots connect and the stars align with these 15 signals, that we think that there's a strong likelihood of conversion. So we're going to enter you with an aggressive bid. Great. And if there's 13 of the 15 signals that meet the check boxes, we'll have an adjusted bid that's slightly lower than if all 15 were met. Now that's essentially how a learning algorithm works, where it finds the trends, the data points that it can essentially rely on to replicate at scale where it can reasonably predict results. And once it reaches that point, it's going to just really focus on, say, those 15 signals and trying to match up as many auctions at as much as your budget as possible, those 15 signals. But for all you know, 3 to 6 months down the road, something is going to change with the marketplace where there's 5 other signals that the algorithm had not previously really looked at scale that could potentially help you become even more profitable, to predict better outcomes, to reach more people in a more effective way. But because you've kind of let it just sit over here and optimize with these 15 signals, it hasn't been willing to dedicate enough time and learning to exploring new opportunities. Frederick Valleys has, in his book, which I have a million copies of in the office somewhere, but none on me apparently, but it's Digital Advertising in AI World by Frederick Valleys, who founded the company Optimizer. He gives a reference of like, hey, maybe snowfall accumulation is like a signal that could matter for a business. And maybe it could, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's something that should be considered in the auction. Maybe it matters for a ski resort, but not a software as a service business. So like all these things that might not come up all of a sudden can be entered into the system and learned in a new way if you give the algorithm a little bit of freedom. So I would say in this case, if there is a lot of volume, you have to realize there's so many different like trends that could be unlocked if you just like let the algorithm run wild. But at the same time, to Este's point, you really don't want to like completely turn things on their head because it might not work. And you don't want to completely turn off a revenue generating engine in hope of finding something better. So you need to balance the two of those things.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting points, Patrick, and really great ones. And I think we also talk a lot about liquidity when it comes to all of this. Look at you, look at that smile. This is Patrick's baby. Much liquidity. When it comes to training the algorithm, there's so much data and so much information across the account that we want to make sure it's leveraging as much as possible within individual campaigns. So allowing the algorithm more freedom is a really great point, and adding that liquidity throughout the campaigns and throughout the account can help train the algorithm even more.
Exactly. So even untouched, over time, you should see some sort of incremental improvement, theoretically. Doesn't always happen, but it should be able to learn some things along the way. But you can set aside some test budget to nudge it a little bit further in the right direction. But all the disclaimers there, not everything is always going to work the way we would love it to. So the second question on this was the second example for a service business. So the first question was for an e-commerce business, which is a little bit more straightforward. E-commerce is much easier to track because you have revenue exchanged at some point online, hopefully right after the click happens. With lead gen, there's a sales component. There's a sales team. There's offline conversion tracking. There's other variables that make this ecosystem more complicated. So this is a service business. I work with a lot of roofers. Okay, so it's a local service, so this is very competitive. High CPCs, small search volume, and a small radius around their business. Okay, the keywords are pretty straightforward, right? Roofer near me. Keywords are pretty straightforward, and on top of that, they usually go for a budget around $1,000 to $2,000 per month. So it's a low budget, high CPC, tight search volume, very competitive. It's honestly one of the most challenging sorts of accounts that you can be dealing with. And then the question is, how do you train an algorithm to get better if the account has about 10 to 20 conversions a month? I usually can't even get an algorithm to work in such a cramped account. It's tough. It's certainly tough. And honestly, there are times like algorithms work great at scale. You're operating in a much smaller, like a less scalable environment. You'll need to do more traditional marketing and advertising than the previous example with the e-commerce store. Like you will it in the other example, it's much more okay. Let's let the algorithm do its thing. That's where we're going to get our benefit. Here, if you're not doing good marketing and good advertising and good salesmanship from the very beginning, then you're ultimately never going to be able to make this work. But Esty, for this roofing example, what do you think are some tips?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I think when you're saying traditional marketing and that approach, I think that's a really good point, and it's about creating that brand awareness to increase that search volume. The problem here right now is the overall volume, right? We need to get more data. In order to get more data, we need more volume. So if we try to increase the brand awareness so that we can help increase the volume of people searching for our company or our service, that can help with people like when they're searching, they're familiar with our company, and then they'll click compared to all the other competitors. So that may help with overall volume. The second thought is I would consider qualifying different conversions with more micro conversions, identifying what attributes across your different leads and different quality conversions. Whether does that mean they have been on the site, they've searched the site for about 2 minutes, or have they viewed an average amount of, 5 pages on your site. Trying to create those micro conversions, what we like to call them as micro conversions, to help increase that volume, can help train the algorithm first towards a higher quality audience, and then help increase that overall volume as well. My other thought is that what we have been very pro on is leaning towards more of a maximized click strategy to try to increase, again, since it's a volume problem, we really want to try to get as much volume as possible. So really maxing out the volume with the maximized click strategy, gather as much data as possible, and then help train the algorithm with that additional data towards those higher quality conversions as well.
Totally agree. So we were historically not into the whole maximized clicks thing. I don't really think it even gets mentioned very much in the book, because it's really like what you really want to be doing is a conversion oriented strategy. Like, full stop. Please don't think that anything other than conversions is ultimately what matters. But there are times where your ultimate goal is to get to be able to lean on more conversion data, but it's just not available for you. So you have to figure out what other levers that you can pull in the meantime. And you have to be careful with how you do these things. But if you think about if you're a limited budget, and let's also look at a really bottom funnel search term, right? So if it's roofers near me, that's pretty high intent. And that's probably, like, everyone searching for that is probably looking for the service that you offer. It's not as if that could also mean something's looking for, it's probably not the name of a band and someone's Googling lyrics or tickets to a show for a band called Roofers Near Me. Like, that's what I mean of, like, very, very specific bottom funnel search. If that's the case, if there's very little additional signal data that you need to tell Google that this is somebody I want to bring to my website, then theoretically you could benefit from just saying, hey, I want as many of these people as possible. Get me as many of these clicks, which is going to reduce your CPC. It's going to increase your click-through rate. And you're going to get more of these people. You're going to be able to play that numbers game. But you also have to leverage the micro conversions. You have to do everything else well. You have to have really good copy on your landing page. You have to be doing good marketing and advertising. None of this is going to work if you look like you're a bad company, if you don't have social proof on your website, if you're not leveraging a mobile-friendly website, if there's spelling errors and other things that make sloppy mistakes, people are not going to hire these companies to come to their house. So all those traditional marketing things absolutely need to be in play if you want to do any of this right. I think those are good answers. We have to wrap up in a minute, but there's this big thing in the PPC world right now about broad match modified. We don't really seem to care at Adventure Media. Esty, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it really not, I guess.
Nothing changes for us.
It's still there. It's just a different symbol.
Right, like we've been pro broad match keyword and just like automation. If you've embraced automation over the last year, 2, 3 years, like this means literally nothing. And like I find it so interesting to watch LinkedIn and Twitter and even like look, this own Facebook group has a lot of people that are like freaking out about the broad match modified change. It really shouldn't change anything that you do. You should have already embraced the reality that these things are going to drastically change, and you should already be thinking about, okay, well, what is it going to look like when we don't have keywords? Okay, well, I have to really understand how bidding algorithms work, and I have to really understand how good landing page copy works. That's the way that we all need to start thinking. We should have been doing it for the last 2 years, and Google is making these changes that are forcing us further and further down that path. It's ripping it off like a Band-Aid. We just need to be ahead of it. You need to predict the fact that we're ultimately going to lose all keywords. So what can you do to put yourself in a position to succeed if and when that actually happens? The broad match modified thing is a very, very small step in that direction. I don't think it's going to change literally anything we do in any accounts.
And I think another step to embracing all this change is reading Patrick's book, because that'll help you embrace it all.
Amazing. Thank you. This is great. Join or Die, digital advertising in the age of automation. Check it out on Amazon. Essie, this is great. We're happy to have you on more often. Thank you.
Thank you for having me join.
All right. Thanks, everyone. More comments in the thread. We'll get back to answering as many as possible. See ya.